Cool. Welcome everyone to a Ask Me Anything session. We had a lot of questions come in from athletes who are on the program, and so we will do our best to get through as many of these questions today as possible. If there are other questions that you want to ask either during or at the end, then certainly let's get those on as well. You know who we are. We don't need to really introduce ourselves again, so I'm happy just to leave my bit. Elizabeth, you fine?
Oh, yeah.
Crack on. Okay. So we're going to go through the athlete questions, and then obviously let's go through any live Q&A as it comes up. So should I abstain from caffeine before a race? If so, for how long before the event? Elizabeth, do you want to tackle this one?
Sure. The research shows that it's not going to change performance significantly. So if caffeine is something that is a part of your daily life and it's going to help you maintain your regular schedule, maintain your mood, maintain a consistent sleep schedule, then it's fine to leave it in. Like, you don't need to take it out, especially if that's going to disrupt your routine and mess up race week.
Yeah, and I concur to that. I think what we've always been led to believe is that athletes should be reducing caffeine consumption leading into races to increase the sensitivity or the effectiveness of the caffeine. As Elizabeth highlighted, the more recent research says that it's probably not going to make that much of a difference. And, you know, if we're talking like elite, maybe those percentages will make a difference. We're talking like, and, you know, I'm not saying anything that we're not all elite athletes. We're not all striving to get the best, but if you break down like those percentages change versus how miserable you may feel during the rest of the week, I would just have your coffee and just feel good about yourself. I think psychologically you're going to be in a much better way. If you take the 200 milligrams of caffeine a few times leading in, like during the race as well, you're still going to get a pretty big buzz. As anyone who follows the caffeine protocol that we use with Fuelin athletes, I think I'd yet to have an athlete say, wow, 200 milligrams or 400 milligrams didn't do anything for me in the race. It's usually, gee, I had a rocket. So whether they've had the coffee or not. Does anyone have any questions regarding caffeine at this point in time? It's all good? Okay. I am noticing I feel quite bloated most of the day. This could be unrelated to following the plan, but just hoping to get your wisdom on the primary causes of bloat. Is it normal during certain stages of a diet life cycle, and tips on how to counteract it? I'll take on this one just to start, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
So it's something actually I've just written. I've just made some comments, or in the newsletter that's coming out this week, I review 3 studies that look at the gut microbiome, and one really interesting study which was done by a group, I think his name's Tristan Sonnenberg, is they looked at the introduction of high fiber diets and also fermented food and the impact on the function and also the populations of the gut microbiome. Now, this was a 17-week study where they had a 4-week period of maintenance, and then I think it was a 6-week ramp to get to the amount of like high fiber or fermented foods. And then they had a period of time of maintenance. Now, the ramp part of the study was really, really important. And this, what might relate to this person or this athlete's question, is that if you suddenly increase the total amount of fibrous vegetables, in particular, we talk about these 6/5 of veggies. If you suddenly increase that from going from maybe 1 to 1.5 serves of veggies, which is very common in certainly Western diet, in particular American diet, if you're suddenly going from 1.5 or 1 to 6, what might be happening is this increase in fiber in the diet may be causing some of this bloating, because effectively you're getting fermentation in the lower colon, which is what is meant to happen and is what the microbiome will feed on. But invariably, some of that bloating is probably due to increased gas production. So my feeling in relation to this is that this individual athlete has probably drastically increased their consumption of fibrous vegetables, and as such is getting the bloating.
I happen to know the athlete that sent this in, and she had just started working with Fuelin and went from like only eating like zucchini as a vegetable to really trying to get the fistful of greens at every and veg. So it was spot on with the rapid increase.
Cool. And just on that, like, so a bit of a spoiler alert on the newsletter, but these individuals were consuming in the study, they were consuming, by the time they got past the ramp, they were consuming on average 45 grams of fiber per day. Now, again, the average person will consume somewhere between 10 and 15 grams of fiber per day. So you start to see when you do ramp up increased in vegetable intake, you will obviously an increase in fiber intake, and it could be that fiber that ultimately causes some of these adverse symptoms. So, and I think if you're thinking about this, yes, we want you increasing total fiber intake on a daily basis, but then put that into context of where your races are and where high intensity sessions could be, because certainly what we also advocate is reducing fiber intake in those days leading up, certainly that week leading into a major event or a major race, because that could invariably cause GI distress when it comes to race. So it's not a one shot fits all sort of scenario. Yes, you should be eating a lot of vegetables, a lot of fiber, but put it in context of where your races fit as well.
And I think this is a good time to, I have another athlete that was complaining of some stomach GI issues, and he was consuming those like keto bagels and low in carbohydrates because he was trying to match his carbohydrate intake, but the fiber in those was like 33 grams or something in the bagel. So if you're trying to, like, if you're looking at different diet products, whether they're gluten-free, keto, whatever, a lot of those products will have some kind of inulin added to them, because then they can claim that they're low carb because they minus the net carbs from the fiber. And so just beware and mindful. It might not just be the veggies that you're consuming. You might have changed other aspects of your diet, switched to sweeteners, things like that, that might also be upsetting your gut.
And just an interesting point about the processed fibers is actually, they don't appear to have the beneficial effect on population growth, but also function of microbiome. So if you are consuming a lot of these processed prebiotics, which you'll often see in a lot of these gut products,
I'm thinking maybe Scott got cut off. Let's see. Can you guys hear me at all? Yes. Okay. Well, all right. Scott will hopefully jump back in. Let's see. It did cut off, so I don't know exactly what he left off on. But I can work on pulling up the
It looked to me like the last question on the slide was about syncing with women's cycles.
oh boy, oh, the big one. we spent a lot of time on this one. Thanks, Kathleen. Let me download
Which I'm personally very interested in your response.
I don't want to spoil Scott's big moment because we had a big discussion about this, but the science just isn't there. Not to contradict other very well-known female sports performance folks, but we don't quite have, we don't have the science for that just yet. In terms of the female cycle is so different that there's just no continuity in the studies, and it shows that the evidence for very specific needs and effects isn't consistent across all women. Some women do experience a greater testosterone boost, some women do not. The regularity and frequency of your cycle really depends on whether or not you'll feel like if you have a 21-day cycle, a 28-day cycle, all those kinds of components. So let's see, I will bring up, share my screen.
So hard for the Fuelin program to sync with something so personal to each individual.
It is, especially because that data, even if we had your cycle, while it would be useful in terms of potentially increasing carbohydrate consumption, it's not, like, it's more geared right now towards your training. So we wouldn't be changing your fueling plan all that much unless we had a history with each specific athlete. Does that make sense? Like if we knew, okay, Kathleen's cycle is 21 days, and on these days, her workouts suffer, she's tested, she's higher in testosterone and lower on these days, then potentially we would fuel a strength session different. Again, potentially. I have to do you. Okay. All right.
Can you hear me? Sorry, I'm back.
Welcome back. All right,
Sorry.
it's the perfect time. We're starting on the menstrual cycle one. I gave him a little.
Sorry. Where are we? Okay, so are you presenting or me?
I quick jumped on, but if you want to share your screen, that's fine.
Yeah, I'll present mine.
Okay.
Sorry, as I don't know what happened. It just suddenly melted down. Okay. 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 What's going on? Sorry, meltdown. Sorry, I don't know. Maybe you're better at presenting. It's going very funny. I'm so sorry, everyone. This is not what we want. Kathleen, effectively, what I found with a lot of the athletes was that it was just another thing to factor in that didn't really make much difference. The reality is, and I think when you look at the research, and we'll go through these points, and when you look at some researchers who've looked at this in a lot more detail, again, it comes back to, are you in the top 1%? And if you're a professional athlete and striving for those 1%ers, maybe it will make a big difference. The reality is the performance difference it makes in terms of follicular and luteal phases, and the differences in carbohydrate versus fat oxidation in terms of intensity, and trying to manipulate your diet to be in time with that, it doesn't seem to have that big an impact. Now, that's on a gross setting. Individuals are going to exist. So if you're a female and you feel better with higher fat fueling in the luteal phase and you're happy to plan that in, then certainly it could. I think, again, look at big picture. Are a lot of people just either not taking in enough protein, not taking in carbohydrates at the timing that is better for them in general, and are they over consuming fat or under consuming fat based on their training schedule? If you get the basics right, I'm pretty certain, based on, again, the large cohort that we've heard go through, that they will start to feel better anyway. Then maybe it's a case of dialing in the specificity around menstrual phase. That's my take on it, and that's certainly take even from some professional athletes that I've worked with, where it was just a bit too hard to factor in, and if they just focused on eating well all the time and fueling appropriately, they felt better anyway. Does that answer your question, Kath?
She said, not my question, but
oh, it wasn't your question. Sorry.
No.
I
was just trying to help
address it.
Oh,
She
sorry.
helped bring up. Yeah, thank you, Kathleen, for helping on the pause.
Okay, so
it's still very interesting. Thank you.
it is super interesting, and I think, look, without poo-pooing this and without shutting it down, I think it just comes down to more research required. I think if we look through majority of research in athletics and certainly running and cycling, majority are men. We just don't have the data on women to say equivocally or unequivocally that, you know, women need to be doing this. I think there's just, it's probably, if we look at a lot more of the research around LEA, low energy availability and REDS and that's probably a far bigger issue than worrying about whether you should take in high fat, low carb at the last 2 weeks of your menstrual cycle, in my opinion. I'm not a female, so I'm probably maybe speaking a little bit out of turn, but that's my opinion on it. If we look through the research, you know, and just keep in mind, this is one study, high intensity exercise, there was lower carbohydrate oxidation and higher fat oxidation in the late luteal phase. Put that in context, high intensity exercise will generally, you know, like I just think high intensity exercise, you've got to look at this and say, okay, how much lower carbohydrate oxidation? Was it statistically significant? Was it clinically significant in terms of what they saw? And I don't, again, when you look through this, I don't think it was clinically significant for the majority of people. Submaximal exercise, carbohydrate and lipid, i.e. fat oxidation, remains similar between mid-luteal and late follicular phases. Again, what does that mean? It means if you're just not exercising super high, regardless of what phase you're in, it's probably going to be there or thereabouts. And then another study which found absolutely no change in that fat oxidation versus whole body, so free fatty acid, availability and fat oxidation across the entire menstrual cycle. And that was, so one of the things that's proposed, and I hope I get this right, is as estrogen levels rise, fat oxidation should be improved and carbohydrate oxidation will be reduced. But what this study showed is that regardless of what was happening with estrogen and progesterone, the oxidation or the utilization of these particular substrates didn't change at all. A really cool thing was that, you know, carbohydrates prior to exercise, regardless, it obliterated any effect that the menstrual cycle had. So in that case, again, thinking about if you take on carbohydrates, and probably the key word here is prolonged exercise. And I can't remember the exact length of time that these people exercise, but I got a feeling it was well over 2 hours. And certainly if we look at a lot of the research in men, it's duration of exercise that is the key factor with improving fat oxidation, regardless of what you're eating. So once you get over 3 hours of continuous exercise, you will get peak oxidation rates of fat and peak oxidation rates of carbohydrates, regardless of what you're eating. So if you want to shift that curve to the right in terms of improving fat oxidation or fat burning, then certainly it is about prolonged exercise at that lower intensity that's going to have that big impact. So I think the take home from this, it is possible based on varying studies that metabolism could be affected for a female by their menstrual cycle. And it could have an impact at higher intensity exercises. Probably for lower intensity prolonged, it probably doesn't make any difference, but certainly maybe at higher intensities, there could be an impact. And so for my takeaway from this is, rather it being more on the nutrition side, I think it's more about the coaching side. I think if you're really concerned about that you can't cope in the late phases of your menstrual cycle, that coaches shouldn't be putting in really high intensity interval training and high intensity work if you're one of those females that really struggles in that late phase of their menstrual cycle. And then what we would do is the nutrition, again, if you think about it, if the coach is putting in lower intensity, longer duration sessions, what are we going to be doing? We're going to be giving you lower amounts of carbohydrates, more fat in those circumstances. So the nutrition works off the training in that sense. I think it's very hard for an athlete to suddenly start increasing their fat intake if the coach is giving them a lot of high intensity exercise, because you're going to feel shit as well. Excuse the language, but that's my take on it. So I think it's nearly like a narrative with your coach to have a chat about how you function during your menstrual cycle. And then we would appropriately fuel you for that work. That's my take on it. Anyway, what's your take, Elizabeth?
Well said.
I'm not a female. So.
Well said on all the things. Like, your training needs to be changed if you know in overall carbohydrate consumption is what's important, properly fueling your body. And it's different with every female. I could take 10 of my best friends and we would all have different responses to at different phases of our cycle. So
yeah. And that's the study there. That was one of the studies there that we used, which looked at the impact of menstrual cycle phase on athletes' performance. It's a really interesting paper, certainly for people to look at. I think I really like this message, that our overall take-home message, and this is written by I can tell you it's written by Asker and Kirsty Elliott-Sale, is that their take-home message is that although exercise performance was trivially reduced, slightly poorer during the early follicular phase of the menstrual cycle compared with the other phases, the effects are likely to be so small as to be meaningless for most sportswomen. It is worth noting that these tiny effects might have relevance to elite athletes where the difference between winning and losing is marginal. And I cannot overemphasize that enough. Like, focus on big picture here, people, because I think we can get lost in all the science, and people are worrying about should they eat this amount of fat or this amount of carbs at this particular point in time. Focus on the big picture of, are you getting enough carbohydrates? Are you getting enough fat? Are you getting enough protein? And are you getting enough calories? And is the timing of those around your sessions correct? I think that's a much better place to start, and then worry about the intricacies of manipulating your diet according to things like this down the line. I think it could go this way in the future. I just think at this point in time, there's not enough evidence to show that it is meaningful for a lot of athletes. And that's the paper there. So the effects of menstrual cycle phase on exercise performance. And this is obviously in people with a normal menstrual cycle as well. So, abnormal menstrual cycle is a whole different sort of kettle of fish. Okay. Does anyone have any questions on that before we move on? Because I know it is a huge topic, and it's probably not. It's interesting. I find it interesting as a male. I know it's not as topical for a male because you probably don't think about it. I think men have menstrual cycles personally. So I think not menstrual cycles, but certainly hormonal cycles. I think we go through periods of time where we have lower energy, and there is some talk about this, whether men do go through these phases as well. So it's certainly interesting, hormonal fluctuations. We see it in testosterone just from a diurnal perspective. You have higher amounts of testosterone in the morning, and it will decrease as you go, and so on. So same with cortisol and whatnot. So, or the inverse of that. Anyway, we'll move on. I have a stress fracture, resting at present. Anything you can recommend to change in order to keep healing well? I don't know. Is the person on here? I don't know if this was a female or a male. that asked this question. I can't entirely remember. The first question I would have is probably, why did the stress fracture come on? And unfortunately, majority of stress fractures come on due to low energy availability, and ultimately that paradigm of red S, the relative energy deficiency in sport. So I guess the first question is probably, was this person under fueling and overtraining relative to their energy consumption? Certainly if it's a fresh stress fracture, then one of the things you don't want to be doing is reducing calorie intake, certainly over the first, probably week of when you've had this diagnosis, because the body is trying to heal itself. And with any injury, probably the first thing that a lot of people think or consider doing is reducing caloric intake, because they think they're going to get fat. Your actual resting metabolism is going to go up dependent on the degree of the injury, but certainly you want to be thinking about feeding the injury and allowing it to, heal as best it can in those early stages. As I said, certainly the first 5 to 7 days, I wouldn't be considering dropping calories, and if anything, possibly increasing them. Do you have anything about caloric intake on that, Elizabeth?
No, just that you have to maintain or exceed depending on where the stress fracture came from, and that natural instinct of, all of a sudden I'm not exercising, I should dramatically cut back calories, like go absolutely the opposite of that.
Yeah,
and only going to prolong the injury. And we're not saying to all of a sudden like eat a smorgasbord of food, but
keep it at the same amount you would have been doing based on your training.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing that I see a lot in the lay person. So when worked in professional sport, we would always talk about training the athlete, not training the injury. So if you've got, let's say, for instance, you've got a navicular stress fracture, or a navicular is a small bone in the foot, just so everyone knows, or a heel bone fracture, let's say that. You're in a boot. It does not mean you cannot do anything, okay? So you can do upper body weights training. You can do push-pull very easily in a vertical and a horizontal direction. You can do the contralateral leg. You could do, in this case, you could obviously do contralateral, so the opposite leg press. You can do open chain training, even on the injured leg. So even if you're in a boot, you could do leg extensions, you could do leg curls. You can do a lot of core training where you're unloading that leg. So you can do side planks, reverse planks. You could do kneeling, cable, core work. Like, you're only limited by probably either your own imagination or by your trainer's imagination. In terms of fitness, you can do single leg cycling on like a Concept 2 trainer. You can do single leg rowing. What else? You can do grinding, arm grinding. You can do kneeling or seated ski erg. Like, there are heaps of ways you can keep your actual total exercise capacity up. So just because you get a stress fracture doesn't mean you need to stop training. And that's a really important part as well. So that's a conversation you can have with your trainer or with a trainer or with your coach about what you can do to maximize your fitness. Because if you go and lie in bed, and I tell you now, if you lie in bed for 24 to 48 hours, you can have rapid muscle loss. Like, it is actually scary. And if you're over 40 and you lie in bed for 36 hours, you can lose. There are some crazy percentages thrown out there about how much lean muscle mass you can lose in 36 to 48 hours of complete bed rest. So I would just throw that on there. And then if you think then about, like, if we break down the nutrition, yes, we said you don't want to drop your total calories. Certainly keep your protein intake very high. I would certainly aim to keep that as high as what we recommend. So that somewhere between 2 and 3 grams per kilo body weight. Your fat intake should probably just be kept at about the moderate level, which is again where we aim for, probably around 1 gram per kilo body weight. And then the carbohydrate, majority of your carbohydrate sources are going to be vegetables and lots of fibrous type vegetables, to keep the energy intake up, but also just to maintain total caloric density. Supplements you could consider using. I would certainly, I don't think there's any harm in using collagen at this point in time. I would certainly advocate that just because of the different amino acid structure. So I'd be taking probably around 20 grams of collagen per day with around 500 milligrams of vitamin C. There is a product called Forte, Forte, which I've used with some athletes. I think it's a prescription tablet, but it's fairly high dose of vitamin D. There is some other pretty funky ingredients in it. It's not cheap, but just anecdotally, those athletes have taken that and done everything else. They've all healed very, very quickly and very well. So I'm sort of like throw the kitchen sink at the problem and make sure you just hit it from all angles. If you do have a stress fracture, there are other modalities, things like low intensity pulsed ultrasound, or lifys, as it's called. You strap this onto the stress fracture site for 20 minutes a day, twice a day. And that's been shown to be effective in terms of healing fractures or non-union type fractures. The results in stress fractures probably haven't been studied that well, but certainly I'd give it a go. You can usually get that through your insurance company as well, and just ask for that. I think it's made by, I don't know if it's not Smith and Nephew, lifys. I can't remember the brand, but anyway, it's called lifys, Lipus, low intensity pulsed ultrasound. I'd certainly be thinking about using that as well.
Here in the States, there's a company called H-Wave that does it, the same ones that make Mark Pro, but it's the medicinal, like the opposite side, the therapeutic hospital side.
Yeah, I thought H-Wave was just, we used to use that for pain. I thought that was just a pain gate stim, as opposed to a bone stim. Do they do a bone stim too?
Yeah, they have that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. It works, like it's pretty cool. So yeah, I'd certainly be thinking about that. Just trying to think, is there anything else I would use? Just make sure your vitamin D status is on point as well. I think the overriding thing with the stress fracture is work out why you developed the stress fracture. Was it low energy intake? Was vitamin D status poor? Was your training volume just super, super silly and intensity silly, and that caused the issue as well? Okay, should I cut back on calories during the postseason? Elizabeth?
Well, if you're not doing anything during the postseason, which we do not recommend, you always want calorie intake to match calorie expenditure. So it entirely depends on what you're doing. If you are trying to work on body composition during the postseason, it's a great time to manipulate your calorie intake, increasing protein, decreasing carbohydrate intake. If you're looking to gain muscle, doing a strength program, then it's not the time to be cutting back specifically on calories, certainly not cutting back on protein. If you are looking to cut back on calories because you're worried that the postseason you're not doing as much training, so if it's coming from a disordered eating perspective, you have to be really careful that that's not why you're looking to, like, you're not using the postseason as an excuse or a rationale for cutting back calories. So look at your activity level, look at your goals during the postseason, and then accommodate accordingly.
Yeah, I think your last point there is really important, is like, look, like at the end of the race season, sort of step back and do an assessment of like, how did the season go and what were the areas in which you felt didn't necessarily result in you having the best season possible. Now, if body composition is potentially a factor in this, the first thing we would suggest is quantifying that. So if you got a DEXA at the start of the season, certainly coming into postseason, get a DEXA scan. Like, just take away any of the sort of emotion out of it and just say, okay, well, this is where I'm at. This is my bone mineral density. This is my subcutaneous fat. This is my visceral fat. This is my lean mass index. This is my fat mass index. This is my visceral fat, or VAT. This is where I'm at. How does that look in relation to where I want to be for next season? And is it something I actually need to work on? Or maybe you don't need to work on it. maybe your body composition is actually very good, and it's more a psychological thing where you think being thinner is going to make you faster. It's not necessarily the case. It may be a case of actually putting on lean mass, i.e. putting on weight, could actually be the thing that determines a much better postseason, a really good postseason, and a better 2023. So before you worry about cutting back on calories, what I would say, and what we would certainly say, is understand where you're at the end of the race season and where you're coming into postseason first and foremost. As Elizabeth said, cutting calories is important if you're talking about reducing body fat and body mass. Like, it's physics, okay? Doing that in a controlled manner in relation to your training program, that's what's really important. If you are going to cut calories drastically, your training volume probably needs to drop as well, okay? And this is a discussion with your coach. If you really want to improve body composition, you can cut training volume, you can pick up training intensity in the form of weight training, high intensity intervals, cut training volume down significantly for a short period of time in order to get body composition better, and then start to ramp up your more specific type triathlon training. And it's not that you can't do triathlon training during this time, just be aware that it's not going to be really, really high quality sort of triathlon training. It's probably just, doing some low intensity rides and low intensity runs just to keep the feel.
Also, it's that time of year when people start to look at like cleanses, detoxes. So while we're looking at cutting back on calories, not a good idea. Your body doesn't need detoxing or cleansing. Certainly if you have like a shit diet, you can eat a better diet. But if you're looking at like something like a juice fast or a like 5-day smoothie, whatever, to cut back on calories, there are better, smarter ways to do it. Not an appropriate or beneficial activity because it's not really making an impact.
And actually, on that point of cleanses and detoxes, majority of those are aimed at improving gut health. And one of the really, and I think I mentioned this in the newsletter articles, but ultimately, if you think about that, if you're doing a cleanse, like, what are you getting rid of? You don't know if you're getting rid of the good or the bad bacteria by doing these cleanses. And actually, if you want to think about doing a proper cleanse would be actually increasing the total amount of fiber and the type of populations within the gut, as opposed to reducing them. And so the way you do that is actually by feeding them appropriately through lots of fibrous vegetables and so on. So it is one of those things, like juice detoxes or, all that sort of stuff. It is just an absolute waste of time and will probably, in my opinion, do you more harm than good.
Amen.
I have a family history of heart disease. I'm concerned about overdoing the salt intake. Has there been any research on long-term effects of this taken into consideration? I think this is a really good question. The first thing I would say about family history of heart disease, and we'll do another one probably in the early new year about sort of total health. But we had Amber, who was an athlete and also a cardiologist, do a seminar on cardiovascular disease and screening. I think the biggest thing here is, if you've got a family history of heart disease, then understand your risk. So this is based on familiar history. So, your first line and second line relatives, what is the risk of, have they had heart disease? What is your ApoB? What is your LPA? What is your cholesterol ratio? What is your HbA1c? Which is a measure of your blood sugar over 90 days. I think if you take those and you take those to a cardiologist, and then they use that information to then do follow-up screening, things like a calcium score, a CTCA, potentially an echocardiogram, maybe a stress test, then you start to understand the risk of what you've got. Now, if you've got high blood pressure, then sodium intake certainly could be something to consider and be mindful of. We know that high volume of sodium, if you are sensitive to sodium, can increase blood pressure. Given the current environment with this fascination with high dose sodium in every drink that everyone is drinking, I think it is a timely question to step back and think about how much sodium are you taking in all your fluids, and when do you need to be taking in this sodium. So what you notice now in the sweat test calculator within Fuelin is that it's now quantifying the amount of sodium you're taking in terms of milligrams per hour and milligrams per liter. And if you think about the talk that I did with Alan McCubbin, majority of sessions that don't go over sort of 3 to 4 hours probably don't actually require any sodium intake to be consumed during that. Now, I'm not saying you do that all the time, because one of the points I made was that you also need to practice what you're doing in your training to replicate what you're doing in race nutrition. But the caveat to this is that you're coming into postseason, and maybe in postseason, think about reducing your total sodium intake if the sessions aren't long in duration, and certainly you're not sweating a lot, and you can replace that sodium through habitual diet either before or after the sessions have completed. I do get concerned about the amount of sodium that people are taking in. I think it is too much generally. And so I think it is something that I would like to see a lot of the Fuelin athletes probably cutting back on their sodium intake, certainly in the postseason, and then just taking in sodium amounts at specific times to help fuel and practice their hydration plan in training. Do you have anything you want to add to that? Sorry, it was a bit of a rant, but I don't know. Does everyone, I just am interested, is everyone smashing sodium at every session? Does everyone literally have an electrolyte on the bike every time you do a bike session?
I did before you talked to McCubbin about it. I feel better. And I know that that's probably somewhat psychological, but I don't know that I feel better during. I feel better after.
I think it's pretty interesting. Like I did a spin session, like, in my spin sessions are nothing like your spin sessions, I'm sure, but I did one and I had some electrolytes, and I literally smashed that bottle so quickly because I was so thirsty. It literally made me thirsty. And so then I had to drink another bottle just to quench my thirst. And by the time I drunk it all, I was overweight. I drank actually too much fluid in relation to the session. Now, was I at risk of hyponatremia? No, but I just had overdrunk, mainly because the salt had driven my thirst, which is, as we discussed, is one of the benefits of taking in sodium, is it will drive thirst. All I'm thinking is, if it's only a 60-minute spin session, you don't need to be drinking electrolytes, okay? I'm just throwing it out there. I love Precision Hydration. I love SOS. I love all these companies. We're good friends with them. And I've been very, I've told them pretty straight out, I don't think everyone needs to drink as much sodium as what you are. So what I would get you all just to think about is how much sodium you are taking in on a daily basis, and look at guidelines around sodium intake in relationship to blood pressure and heart disease. Because I think it's, it could be one of those things in years and years to come where, like, ooh, all these triathletes would, actually, that does bring me to a point. There is a really cool paper, and I will find it. I'll share it in the Facebook group. It discusses this. It talks about, obviously, the benefits of exercise are reduction in blood pressure and improvements in cardiovascular training, cardiovascular health. But then it talks about, like, the impact of high sodium intake and the increasing blood pressure and so on. So it was like, is all the exercise benefits being outweighed by the sodium intake? So, which is why I put this question here. So I'll share that paper and you can all have a read and see what you think about it.
And I wonder too, like, I don't have a lot of salt in my diet. I think because I grew up in that era where it was like, watch your salt. So maybe the electrolytes end up balancing it all out. Like, I don't salt my food really. I don't, so maybe, I don't know. Could that be helping people that don't get a lot of sodium?
Yeah, I think if you look at the American diet, I think you'll be surprised. Like, there's a lot of sodium in a lot of the food. You start to look on the back of labels, and even in Australia, we have the same problem. Like, pretty much everything's got sodium added to it these days. So I think unless you're eating completely, like, fresh veggies all the time and none of the meat or fish is touched in any way, if you're eating any processed food, it will contain a lot of sodium in it. And if you eat out once or twice a week, I can guarantee you're getting your fix of sodium then.
Oh, fine.
Like any takeaway food is going to, anything you're getting from Uber Eats or whatever is going to be laden in salt. So I think it's one of those ones again, isn't it? It comes back to like understanding what you eat.
Yeah.
You can do your best you can by eating out and guessing and that, but really the only way you can control your diet is by cooking it yourself. Because then you know exactly how much sodium's going in.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm conscious of time. Can you please elaborate on, so those were sort of more health related questions. Now we're getting into a little bit more around the program and technical stuff. Can you please elaborate on when to add food we consume via the Fuelin app versus the Lose It MyFitnessPal? I touched on this last week in the Q&A. The way I use Fuelin is I use a combination of the meals. So I build my meal plan per week. I go through, I look at the day before, the next day or the entire week, and I pick meals that I want to eat. I click on those until I get very close to the macronutrients that I've been prescribed. And then if I need to add in weird things that aren't in the Fuelin app, I use MyFitnessPal just to add those into the days as I go. That's how I do it. You can use MyFitnessPal or Lose It solely. A lot of people do that. It's a little bit more, I guess, meticulous and a little bit more precise in doing that. You can obviously just use the Fuelin app and pick the meals and then estimate or guesstimate that you're eating at least very close to those amounts. And I think, again, this comes back to like the topic about the menstrual cycle and then caffeine. It's like, if you can get the trends going in the right direction, I think you're going to be in a very good place. Okay. If you're getting roughly the right amount of protein based and you're hitting very close to the colors being prescribed to you, and you're not over consuming total amounts of carbohydrates or total amounts of fat in particular, for those two macronutrients, then I think you're in a very good place. And then it's about, just being, depending on where you are in terms of your life and whatnot, you can dial in, how precise you are with the MyFitnessPal and Lose It and tracking in that sense. You got this one, Elizabeth.
I would love to have a step-by-step for the week ahead. Okay. So when the plan, it's all about planning and making a menu meal list for the week. I will look at the app and look at what I have for that week. And then I'll go through and select the meals that I want specifically. I know pretty much my breakfast is like one of three things. So that's always kind of standard. And I know what I have going on with that, but dinner specifically and lunch, that's kind of where I get, I guess, tied up. So I will pick all of my meals for the week using an app, and then I will make my shopping list from there. And then I will pinpoint specific days, knowing, like, I try to put the fish at the beginning of the week because that's when I'm going to the store and it's fresh, and then it's not sitting in the refrigerator all week. I'll look at nights that I know I'm going to be out. So I really align calendar, training, plans for the week, know which days are going to be good for me to cook, and then make a shopping list accordingly. I also have a standard, and Scott shared this before, a standard like shopping list. I think we put it in the Facebook group, which if you're not in there, you should all be in the Facebook group. That's just a suggested shopping list of all of the things. Like, whether I made a shopping list or not, there's 15 or so items that are always included in my list every time. And I know that I can make meals from those regardless. And then to keep things varied and interesting, change your vegetables weekly, change the greens that you're using, stop by a farmer's market, shop seasonally, grab some of those. But really the planning aspect of it is what helps me the most. And I think what I've seen in the athletes that I work with, as soon as they can get whatever system works well for them, that's the way that they'll succeed.
Yeah, I concur with that. I mean, I'm fairly rigid, or not rigid in it, but like, I tend to look, we eat, I have my proteins that I pick on like Monday is, again, I do fish weirdly enough on Mondays. Yeah, we'll have our set sort of like, these are the proteins we'll eat on these days. And so I always will have those basic necessities in the fridge or in the freezer. And then the vegetables, again, you have your stock standard vegetables. It's just the way you prepare them is by choosing the meal that is sort of the variation, if you get that. So I will just have the general proteins that I want to consume during the week. And then again, I will look through the app and just go, okay, dinner is this. It's either, for me, it's either low or moderate carb. I just base the meals off that, knowing that probably lunch the next day, again, I'll have a quick glance and it's usually red for me. That I'll just be making. The other thing I'll do is usually make too much of dinner, be as controlled as possible to put some seconds away, and then use that for lunch the next day. And I think that's just a really easy way of keeping on top of food, so that you always have the leftovers and just use those the next day. And then again, if it's red, probably just adding either salad to it or eating what you had. If it is a yellow or a green, just topping up, like we said last week, by adding in, an extra cupped hand or an extra 2 cupped hands of grains, or root vegetables, fruit, and so on. Next question is, where should weight strength questions sit on the Z-score scale? Not much on cardio workout, but put stress on the body. Yeah. Look, the reality is strength training won't go for over 60 minutes. Generally, it shouldn't, especially if you're working fairly hard. So regardless of the Z-score, it's not actually going to impact any in-session fueling. Certainly if you're working very, very hard and you're going for over 60 minutes, certainly consider having, something as simple as a banana or a wrap within that session. It will generally, I always think of a weight session as being a Z3 session, because you should be putting in a fair amount of intensity during the session in order to get the most. The intensity at which you lift weights or push weight around is going to have a very big impact on how much benefit you get from strength training. So if intensity is low in strength training, you probably won't get the results you're looking for. To put it nicely, if you don't work really bloody hard and lift lots of heavy tin, you probably won't see any real results. So don't be nice in the weights room is what I would say. It's okay to make a little bit of noise and drop things and sort of, be a bit aggressive is what I would say. It's the best time. On the homepage, the prescribed breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack has a round small circle in it. That allows you to put a check mark in. When we check that box, is it the fact that we had lunch, or is it directions of eating 2 fists of leafy greens? I thought this was quite a cool question, actually, because it made me think about it. I think it really depends on who you are. Like, again, talking about last week, depending on who you are and what your psychology is it a way of you just going, yep, I had that meal? Or is it your psychology saying, yep, I had 2 fists of leafy greens? Or is it your way saying of, yep, I had 2 fists of leafy greens and I also hit the carb color that I was meant to be having? I think however you want to view it, that's the beauty of it. I think I certainly just tick it when I say I've had that meal. That's how I view it. I don't necessarily view it as the fists of leafy greens. I think because the fists of leafy greens are so ingrained in me that I eat probably about 8 serves of vegetables a day, that it's not really a habit that I have to think about. It's more me thinking about the type of carbohydrates additional that I'm eating. So that's how I view it. Yeah, this one?
So I believe they're asking if they have a scheduled swim, bike, or run session and they don't complete it or don't do it, how do they remove it from the app? And I think probably the question is also, does that affect their daily calorie intake? So it's easy to remove. You can either remove it from Training Peaks, today's plan, or you can go select hide activity in the app, and then you can ask us to rerun the plan. If you have a session like in that day, it's probably too late. If you know like trip plans are changing, that's when it's probably a good time to adjust. Like if you know tomorrow you're not going to be doing the 4-hour ride, 30-minute brick. Removing that and asking us to rerun the plan is definitely beneficial. But I think if it's 5 p.m. and you didn't get your afternoon run in, not worth changing the plan for that day.
Yeah. So if it is in, and just to reiterate on that, if it is in Training Peaks today's plan or final search, just tap on the cell in Fuelin. It will take you back to your plan, delete it from there, go back to Fuelin, request a rerun your plan, and it will be updated within 2 to 3 seconds. So that's how I'd be doing it. But again, don't get too worried about it. Sweat test. If I had to urinate following the exercise, should I do it before or after the weigh-in? And if so, do I record as urinating during the exercise in the test result? I would hold it in, do your weigh-in, and then just do it afterwards and not worry about it. It's pretty easy. At the end of the day, look, this is all about trends. Again, if we come back to the conversation at the start, it's all about trends. Like, you've taken in that fluid. The amount of urination is probably going to be somewhere between 150 and 200 mils. Is it going to shift the needle massively in terms of percentage of weight loss? I don't believe so. So I would hold it in, do the weight, do your calculations, and then go to the toilet afterwards. You could vary it. You could do it once before and once after and see if it shifts the needle massively. But again, we're looking at trends here over time. Again, when we're talking about how much fluid we're recommending that you start to drink in the in-session cell, you see that it's a range. It's never like you need to drink 660 mils of fluid. It's you drink between 500 and 700 mils to maintain that. And I think the more testing you provide, the narrower that range gets and the more precise we can be.
I'll read through a couple questions. If I'm doing a workout session at night, how should I handle eating beforehand? And how late is too late to eat afterwards to not affect sleep? So eating beforehand, I would say, depending on the session, making sure that you're fueled for that session. Logically, if you've had all day of breakfast, lunch, snack, possibly an afternoon snack, you're probably already fueled properly for that session. So it might not take any additional eating. What you might want to be mindful of, though, is what you've consumed that might upset your stomach during that session. So if it's a high intensity session, not eating a meal or a big snack that's high in fiber before that, or high in something that could cause GI distress. Handle eating after what's too late that doesn't affect sleep. If it messes with your regular routine, if you're not used to like training at 9 o'clock at night, it's probably going to affect your sleep regardless, just because your body's not used to being stimulated at that time of night. Digestion wise, you're going to want, some people at least an hour, 2 hours is better before having to go to sleep, depending on what you had. Scott, do you have suggestion? Like I would probably eat a late lunch that would be like more of like a dinner meal, and then have some kind of snack before, and then probably like a smoothie for dinner, or something that's really easy to have after that training session that wouldn't upset that would be easy to have quickly ready. So if my session ended at 9:30, I could quick blend something up easy and then be in bed by 11.
Yeah, I think main thing is avoid any stimulants as well. Certainly don't take any pre-workout in the evening or anything like that, or have any coffee. Again, timing of food probably is an important thing. I aim to consume some carbohydrates in that post-session as well. Carbohydrates can help sleep cycle. So I think Elizabeth's suggestion of a smoothie probably makes sense. If you can get, 30 to 40 grams of protein in with, 30 or 40 grams of carbs via probably fruit. So blending some bananas and blueberries and some milk. The galactose and some of the properties in milk have been shown to improve sleep as well. So I'd probably go down that route so that you're not cooking, you have a very quick snack, go to bed, hopefully not feeling too full, and hopefully get through it.
Okay, how do I gauge how much water to drink each day, including with workouts, days without workouts?
Look, I don't think there is any really accurate way. I think you can, I think if you're peeing clearly, each day, then you probably know you're drinking enough. It's probably that. As long as your urine's not bright colored and not really smelly and it's fairly clear, you're probably drinking enough. I think that's a pretty good way. In terms of your sessions, obviously, you know, understanding how much you need to consume in session is going to be based on you doing more and more sweat rate tests. So weighing yourself before and after the sessions, and seeing how much fluid you lose and then judging that appropriately. And what you might see is those sessions that are 60 minutes or 60 minutes or less, you pretty much don't lose any fluid, and therefore you don't need to be smashing electrolytes during it, and certainly not high amounts of them.
Another one, I see triathletes on YouTube using maple syrup. Is that legit? Does anything get added to the maple syrup?
Maple syrup is one of the products I really like is Endurance Tap. There is another product called Untapped. You can buy Endurance Tap through the Fuelin app. We're just actually doing, so you all know, is that we've done a partnership with the feed, and that will go live, I think, today. So you can buy everything directly through the feed, individual products and whatnot. And I think they're giving you, $25 or $50 a quarter in credit, which is pretty cool. And a free Fuelin water bottle if you want it. You can just get that for free when you order something. So that's cool. But maple syrup is a naturally occurring carbohydrate and sugar. It's sucrose, so it's glucose and fructose pretty much in a 1-to-1 formulation. It's legit, it works, tastes delicious, it's got no viscosity, so it slides down very easily, super easy to swallow, and tastes delicious. Who doesn't love maple syrup? They do add a little bit of sodium to it, and a little bit of ginger, I think, just to change the flavor profile slightly, but it is delicious and it's very good. You can buy that through the feed, or you can buy it directly through Endurance Tap's website. No association with them. We just used it a lot at the Maple Leafs, at the Toronto Maple Leafs, because they're Canadian and that's what Canadians do. They drink maple syrup. So, you know, that's how I found it. And I thought it was an awesome product.
I get this question a lot. Why could honey work just as well?
Well, theoretically, honey could. I think it's just very sticky and gets like everywhere. But I think the fructans in which relates to FODMAPs are a little bit different in honey and can cause more GI distress if consumed in high volumes, whereas maple syrup doesn't seem to do that. But I can have a look at the total amounts of, total grams of honey that could cause relatively upsets with people who suffer from FODMAP sensitivity.
Cool.
Well,
that's all.
I know we're over. Is that everything?
Questions. Yep.
I saw one about sodium.
Oh, I didn't.
Hold on. What was the question?
We were talking about, you asked if we used.
Would too much sodium cause weight gain? Well, it's probably not the sodium that's causing the weight gain. You certainly can get swelling, but it's the sodium in combination with carbohydrate, because you need carbohydrate to transport the sodium across the cellular membrane. And it's probably the carbohydrate that is attracting. So for every gram of carbohydrate, you attract around 4 grams of water. So it's usually the carbohydrates in combination with the sodium that causes the fluid retention. How much of that? There's probably multitude of factors that relate to that. You will get those athletes at the end of a race who do report a lot of swelling. And then I think when you talk to them, they're generally taking in a hell of a lot of sodium and a hell of a lot of carbohydrates. And that residual swelling will generally decrease after 24 to 36 hours. Cool. There's a lot of information, probably too many questions as usual. Trying to cover too much. Anyway, I hope it was useful. It's lovely to see so many of you on here. I hope you're all, I can't see many faces, but I hope it was enjoyable. I hope you'd learned a lot from today. Love the questions. Oh, what's that question? Love the questions. I think these sessions will probably aim to do like an Ask Me Anything once a month, I think, as these Q&As, because I think they're really good for us to learn about how you're using the product, but also what type of things you're interested in. I've just got one last question. Scott, you mentioned increasing fat oxidation earlier. Is there something that can be increased by manipulating fat intake? Yeah, so what we know, Noah, is that if you increase the relative amounts of fat in the diet, it has been shown to increase the relative oxidation or utilization of fat. That comes at the cost of reducing carbohydrate oxidation, though, and reducing the ability to use carbohydrates at higher intensity. So it is one of those ones where you just got to think about, what are you trying to achieve? If you're trying to achieve improvements in body, and again, like, improvements in body composition are going to come from probably being in a caloric deficit versus a caloric surplus as well. Your improvement in efficiency in utilizing the different substrates, i.e. fat versus carbohydrates, is probably going to come through duration of exercise session, i.e. getting into those long, low load exercise training sessions using lower amounts of carbohydrate and higher amounts of fat. That's what's probably going to improve mitochondrial efficiency and utilization of fat, more so than, I believe, manipulating the diet in just by taking in more fat. Does that answer your question?
It does. The reason I asked is, during a race, race nutrition discussions of, doing 90 to 100, I know some of the pros do 120 grams hourly intake. Is just, it's a lot of work on the GI system. So my question comes from, if one can increase their fat oxidation, that would benefit them during the race, and then you can top that up with carbs. So instead of relying on 90% carbs, maybe it's 80-20, carbs versus fat, just to help the GI system, especially when doing a full Ironman. You're 5-6 hours on the bike and another 3 or 4 hours on the run. It's a lot of carbs on an hourly basis.
Yeah, so the theory of what you're talking about is what everyone's aiming for. I think, again, utilization of carbohydrates comes at the cost of oxygen consumption. So the higher intensity you're working, or the higher percentage of your max heart rate or percentage of VO2, is going to push you towards utilization of certain, the higher you get, the more you're going to rely on carbohydrates. So what it comes down to is, if your intensity leading into that race, if you can keep your intensity lower, then yes, you're going to be using a mixture of carbohydrates and fat. So the fitter you get, and the ability to not, if your zone 3, for instance, is a lower percentage of your maximum VO2, then you're going to be using more fat as a fuel source versus carbohydrates. It's when you start to get higher and higher into the percentage of VO2, you're going to be relying more and more on carbohydrates. Now, it's not like a switch either, where you go, okay, 60%, right, you go from fat to carbs. It's like a crossover. There is that crossover point, and you get less fat utilization, more carbs. So ultimately, the ability to use more fat as you go in the early stages is beneficial. But what I also said is, beyond 3 hours, it doesn't matter. You're using carbs and fat at peak oxidation rates anyway. Your maximal peak oxidation rate of fat may be able to be impacted, and your ability to use higher amounts of fat may be from low intensity training in post-season and pre-season. But certainly when you're talking about race situation, you're going to be using fats and carbs anyway. So that's why in an Ironman situation, we may suggest taking in some fat as well as high amounts of carbohydrates, because it just becomes a caloric game at that point in time as well. Because you're going to be going through, I don't know, you're probably, depending on how good you are or how fast you are, how powerful you are, it could be 700 to 1,000 calories an hour, and maximum you're going to be taking in is probably up around 600. So you're going to be in a deficit regardless of what's happening. And then I guess you're relying on, this is why, is it really good to be super, super lean? In a race situation, maybe having a little bit of body fat on you is important, because if you've got a little bit of body fat on you, you can fuel performance as well. So yeah, I think there is that sort of like tipping point of how lean is too lean and how fat is too fat. So yeah. you don't need a whole lot of body fat, obviously, to fuel performance either. You've got enough on us. Most of us have enough to run probably about 20 Ironman. So, it's just the way we are. But yeah, look, I think your point being, and if you come back to the GI distress issue, that's the point of training with higher carbohydrates in training during the season, is using those key sessions to practice high carbohydrate fueling to train the stomach in terms of gastric emptying and then improve absorption from the small intestine. And the only way we can improve that is by practicing it. And that's pretty well researched now. Cool. It's a good question. It's a very good question. So I think more research will come out about this, and how do we manipulate, fat oxidation further to improve that. And again, it probably comes down to the coach, the coach putting in these long duration, low intensity sessions, and we providing minimum amounts of carbohydrate with higher fat fueling during those sessions to help you shift to the right of that curve. And that takes time and effort. Which team are you with?
Which team?
Yeah. Who's your team? Are you with a coaching team, or your coach? Enduro IQ? Oh, okay. So
yeah, he's big into the low carb, high fats, but
yeah, there you go. So Dan will, he'll program in it's not my understanding talking to Dan, he doesn't do super low carb. Does he do 50 grams or not?
Well, I don't stick to that program because of the LDL. I have LDL issues, not issues, but it's a little bit elevated. So I got to stay away from coconuts and coconut oil, MCTs and all that stuff. So it's
there you go. Like, there's a really good point though. And we can talk about this. Like, people start going on high fat, low carb diets. And then you're like, what's the impact from a health perspective on you? If you talk about obliterating the microbiome, the way you kill bacteria is by feeding it a high fat diet, because bacteria feeds on fiber. And that's what produces short chain fatty acids, which pretty much fuel every physiological cellular process in the body. You then dump in a heap of shitty coconut oil on top of that. And we know that will increase LDL and VLDL particles for cholesterol. And so I question whether whilst it might improve fat oxidation, which is yay, great, you're oxidizing fat, you're also reducing carbohydrate oxidation ability and, maybe messing up some health parameters. So that would be my concern with those types of diets.
Everything in moderation is good. Including
moderation. So,
thank you.
Great question. And I think ethnicity, I take it you're like subcontinent, is it? Where are you from?
Iraq.
Okay. So ethnicity will play a role in this, through genetics in terms of cholesterol and lipid profile as well. So I think that needs to be factored in as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, really great question. Thank you. Okay, look, I know we're over time as usual, but we'll say goodbye and reach out if there's any questions in the Fuelin app. I hope everyone's enjoying the new chat feature. It certainly makes life a lot easier for me, like keeping on tabs of everyone and just answering questions and things like that. So yeah, at the end of this, there'll be a short questionnaire. If you're happy to fill it in, please do so. It helps us a lot. And on that note, we'll say goodbye.
Thank you much, guys. Have a good night, day, morning, wherever you are.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.